Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode number 2 of the Die Hard MMA Podcast. I'm your host, Clint McLean. First and foremost, I think we're going to go over the results from UFC 234. I am so stoked. I am so excited. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I'm on a 3-0 win streak for 2019. I've got a positive record through UFC Brooklyn, the Bellator Heavyweight Grand Prix, and UFC Fortaleza, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to start this podcast, I'm going to drop episode 1, and I'm going to bomb. I was terrified that I was going to put out picks and have my first ever podcast episode and just shit the bed. I was really afraid of that. So I'm super excited to report that we went 3-2 on our picks for plus 3.11 units. We nailed it with Jim Crute. Best bet of the night was Jim Crute. And like I said, best bet of the night, hands down, bar none, Jim Crute inside the distance. He wins by first round KO. Now, some people think that might have been a controversial stoppage, but let's be real. If you go back and you watch that knockout, the referee saved poor old Sam Alvey from losing some brain cells. Jim was just going to keep on pouring it on if he didn't get stopped. We nailed our other inside the distance prop, and Ronnie Yaya unfortunately did not get the submission that we were looking for, but hey, you know what? We picked the wrong side on that one. When I broke that fight down, I said that Yaya was either going to get ground out and have a decision loss, or he was going to get the sub and he was going to win the fight by submission. Those were the only two outcomes of that fight. We happened to take a swing on the submission prop because we had slightly longer odds on that, and you know what, we lost that one, but we were getting great value with the shot that we took, and we knew exactly where we stood on that fight. The main event, Kelvin Gastelum, unfortunately, he didn't get the knockout there, so that's a push. The co-main event, Israel Adesanya. I took him inside the distance, and I really thought that was the way to go, but I'll be honest, I don't think I overrated Israel Adesanya. I think I underrated Anderson Silva. Believe it or not, if that's possible to say, Anderson Silva is the greatest of all time, and somehow I managed to underrate him in this fight. I really thought that he was going to be older. I thought he was going to have faded more. I thought Adesanya was going to just have his way with Anderson Silva. And even though Adesanya won it pretty handily, the striking back and forth was actually pretty solid. And I was impressed with how Anderson Silva kept his composure. And I guess taking Adesanya by decision would have been the way to go on that one. But either way, we weren't going to lay that minus 1100. That would have just been ridiculous. So overall, solid start to the podcast. Picks are going great. We're 3-2. Plus 3.11 units. So if you're betting $100 per unit per our, tracking, the way that we're tracking these things, you're up $311 basically if you're tailing these picks. But it brings my overall 2019 record to 15-7 for plus 16.14 units. That's all the picks I've been giving out since the beginning of 2019 on Twitter. So let's keep this rolling. This weekend we've got an awesome double header coming up. We've got Saturday Bellator 216, which as far as Bellator cards are concerned is pretty dang stacked. And then we're going to roll right over to UFC Phoenix, and that one's going to be on Sunday evening. And that card, let me tell you, is stacked. UFC Phoenix is a free fight night, and this card is more stacked than UFC 234, which was a pay-per-view. So I don't know what the UFC is doing. I would have flipped those two. I'd have made the last one free and charged you for this one, because the names on this card here are phenomenal. We've got a real chance of having some solid action on Sunday for MMA. So let's dive right on in. First things first, like I said at the beginning of episode 1, the whole point of the Die Hard MMA podcast is to bring new fans of the sport and turn them into Die Hard fans. It's to bring new young bettors, people who heard about this sports betting thing, and turn them into MMA sports bettors, teach you how to cap fights, teach you what to look for when it comes to these matchups, and let you in on the tricks of the trade that have worked so well for me getting us here to this point. So what we're going to do is start with the Bellator card. It's going to be a bit of a short breakdown. Like I said in episode 1, I don't like to drag my feet and take a lot of time breaking down fights that we're not going to have picks on. And really the undercard for Bellator 216 is going to showcase a lot of young up-and-coming fighters that we've never seen. I definitely suggest that you head over and watch that. A lot of times those are the most exciting fights. If you see a kid coming up that you've never heard of before and he puts on just a barn burner, that's how you make new fans. That's how you get that edge looking for someone who you can maybe bet on down the road, is by watching the undercard and the people who just aren't that well known yet. We're going to start off with Czech Congo versus Vitaly Minakov. Now, I've got a special history with Cheick Kongo. His last fight, actually, he was fighting Timothy Johnson at Bellator 208 Fedor versus Sonnen back in October. And I actually got on him by knockout at plus 400. So we're getting 4-1 on him knocking somebody out. And that was just ridiculous. I tweeted out that was just a way offline. They were completely disrespecting Cheick Kongo. And Timothy Johnson, who had just come from a stint in the UFC, they were massively underrating him and thinking that Johnson would just walk all over him. And not only that, if Cheick Kongo was going to win, it was not going to happen by knockout. Well, ladies and gents, Cheick Kongo KO'd him in the first round. It took him just barely over a minute to get it done, and me and my Twitter followers celebrated pretty hard on that one. I'm a big fan of Cheick Kongo, always have been. Cheick Kongo fought in the UFC and got some pretty high-level experience fighting against guys like Frank Mir, Cain Velasquez, Mark Hunt. What a lot of people don't realize, though, is that one of Cheick Kongo's losses was actually to Vitaly Minakov back on Bellator 115 in April of 2014. So this makes this very interesting. This is a rematch. One of these guys, Vitaly, has continued on his undefeated streak since grinding out a decision win over Cheick Kongo back in 2014, and Cheick Kongo has kind of righted his career since he moved over to Bellator, and after he lost to Vitaly, he's only lost once on that entire run, and it was a split decision questionable loss to Muhammad Lal, King Mo. The line that they have set for this fight is absolutely insane. Over at BetOnline, you can get Cheick Kongo at plus 375. Plus 375. They're basically saying that Cheick Kongo doesn't belong in the cage with Vitaly Minakov. Cheick Kongo is looking better than he has ever looked. I personally am going to take a poke at Cheick Kongo at plus 375. Really, if you score a plus 375, your whole night's good. So we're going to take that shot. We're going to take one last run with Cheick Kongo here and see if he can pull out this massive upset to get our Bellator card started. Fight number 2 that we're going to look at for Bellator 216 is Roy Nelson versus Mirko Flipovic Krokop. Both of these guys are legendary names in the sport of MMA, especially Mirko. Roy Nelson and Mirko both used to fight in the UFC, and this is actually a rematch. They fought each other in the UFC years ago. These guys couldn't be more different. Roy Nelson looks like he's sponsored by McDonald's. He's got a big old gut on him and he rubs it when he wins. He's got a mullet. He's hilarious. Roy Nelson is a fantastic character. Mirko Krokop, on the other hand, is a politician and he's very stoic and silent and he's jacked and seems to just take himself super seriously. This is definitely an opposites attract type of fight, and Mirko actually looks like he's back on the sauce. He is known for having been on steroids back earlier in his career, and that's just kind of the time that it was. Everybody was on steroids. I'm not saying they aren't now, they probably are. Roy Nelson is obviously not on steroids. The line is set with Mirko being a minus 215 favorite and Roy Nelson being a plus 185 underdog, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they know damn well that Mirko is back on the steroids. The recent pictures that have surfaced of him, he looks way more jacked than anybody his age ever should look. And, Roy Nelson being the tubby kind of guy he is, if Mirko's back on the sauce, he'll head kick your head off. The angle I'm going to take on this fight is, I don't see how this fight doesn't go the same way it did the first time. Mirko is a phenomenal striker, but his weakness is his ground game, and it always has been, and he never bothered to develop a ground game. You're going to tell me that he went into retirement, came out of retirement to fight a rematch against a guy, and that whole time he was training his ground game to where now he can hang with black belt Roy Nelson? No. He took a needle and injected the good stuff right back into his biceps so he could punch harder and try and take Roy Nelson's head off. That's what he's going to do here. His ground game hasn't improved. Roy Nelson is a high-level black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I know Mirko's on the sauce, but if Roy Nelson can get him on the ground and get on top of him, Krokop's not getting back up. And that's where I think this plus 185 has some value. Roy Nelson actually looks like the last loss he took in Bellator did him some good. He's gotten into a little bit better shape. I know that's laughable to say when you look at him, but the size of his gut actually has kind of come down a bit, which to me tells me that he's taking this fight seriously. He doesn't want to lose the rematch. He once solidified the fact that he won the first time around, and I think it's going to play out exactly like it did. As soon as Mirko gets a little bit tired, Roy's going to lay on him. And if Roy lays on him for 3 rounds, Roy wins. I see value on the plus 185. That's what we're going to roll with. Now we come to the main event of our Bellator card. Paul Daley versus Michael Venom Page. This fight is fantastic. It's the grudge match of grudge matches for Bellator. They have been cultivating this fight for years. And you know what? Michael Venom Page is Bellator's first real big homegrown star. They've been trying to get this kid to the top level by taking him very, very slowly and not putting him in dangerous positions, making sure he keeps his undefeated record and climbs the ranks and really gets where they want him to be so that they can have their own star that they didn't poach from the UFC or something like that. Well, he's 13-0. They completed their mission. He is the star they wanted him to be at 31 years old. He's 6'3". He's tall for the division. He's got some highlight reel knockouts. The kid is slick, but he's fighting Paul Semtex Daley, who is a massive, I can't really call him a legend. I guess he's not a legend, but he's incredibly experienced. He's got 40 wins and 16 losses. He's got 56 MMA fights. The thing with Paul Daley is he's KO or bust. He's 5'9". He's a little short for the division, but boy does he carry power. He's got 30 KO TKO wins out of his 40 wins. He's got a 75% knockout rate. It's ridiculous. And he's only 35. So you think of Michael Venom Page as the young up-and-comer kid. Paul Daley's only 4 years older than him. He's got one Achilles heel. He loses to the ground game. If you're an incredible high-level wrestler, you can take this guy down and you grind out a decision. And that's almost the only way he loses. He'll give up the submission sometimes, but honestly, I think he does that just to get out of there. Basically, if you're going to grind on him for a full fight, he's like, let's just get it over with, and he gives up his neck. I really honestly believe that. Now, that being said, I think this is a terrible fight for Michael Venom Page. They're putting their superstar in front of a freaking runaway freight train. Semtex is a guy that you just don't play around with. Michael Page does not have the grappling game to keep a guy like Semtex down. He likes to strike like Anderson Silva or Israel Adesanya or John Jones. He likes to find that range and play with his food. That's not what you do with a guy like Paul Semtex Daley. Paul Daley will step in and crack your chin if you try to play that game with him. And I think that he's being disrespected by this line. Michael Page is a minus 220 favorite. The comeback on Paul Daley is plus 185. And you guessed it, we're going to take another big dog. The Bellator 216 show is 3 underdogs, and really we're just hoping 1 or 2 of them come through for the night. If all 3 of them come through, it will be legendary. But I see value on Paul Daley at plus 185. Michael Venom Page has been babied his entire career. Yes, he has skills. I'm not blind to the fact that he's a talented striker, but he's never fought anybody the level of Paul Semtex Daley. And now that he's finally got to face that, I am a huge fan of fading people when they have to take a step up in competition. Even if he passes this test, it is his biggest test to date. And we have seen that Paul Daley will crush anyone who doesn't belong on his level. And I think that's what happens on Saturday night. Also, fun fact, I keep saying Paul's fight name is Semtex. For those of you that don't know that reference, it's actually a plastic explosive, which is just absolutely perfect. Whoever gave Paul Daley the nickname Semtex knew what they were doing. So here we are at step 3. This brings us to Sunday night, UFC Phoenix. The night kicks off with an early preliminary card with 3 fights on it, 2 of which are women's fights, so that's going to be exciting and fun to watch, but unfortunately I don't really have a pick on any of those particular fights. The preliminary card is a 4-fight slot, and the first fight of the night that we're going to have a pick on is Ashley Evans Smith versus Andrea KGB Lee. Now, Ashley Evans Smith is 6-3 and has not been overly impressive in the UFC. Her last 3 fights are a loss to Ketlen Vieira, a loss to Sarah Moraes, and then a win over Bec Rawlings, which Bec Rawlings was cut after that fight, if I remember correctly, and no longer fights in the UFC. She was kind of the bottom of the bar as far as women's go in the UFC. So beating her, if you're going to be in the UFC, you need to be beating her. Andrea KGB Lee, on the other hand, is 9-2. She comes to us from Invicta, where a lot of the women's fights are basically spotlighted in Invicta. She's on a 5-fight win streak currently, with her first win in the UFC being a 3-round decision. I think this fight is relatively simple. I think that Andrea KGB has a high ceiling. She's going to continue to improve, and Ashley Evans Smith is just not that good. I think KGB has a solid advantage on the feet in this fight, and I just think she's a solid bet to win by decision. You can get her at minus 170 over at 5 dimes, and unfortunately there aren't really any props out at this point at most of these places. 5 dimes usually has some pretty good ones, but they don't seem to be up at the time that we're recording this. So I would love to take KGB Andrea Lee by decision. I think you're going to get some extra juice on that because I just don't see her finishing the fight. But we're going to go ahead and take her at minus 170 to get our night started, since that's the line we've got available. The next fight we're going to take a look at is Jimmy Rivera, 22-2-0 against Aljamain Aljo Sterling, 16-3. Boy, is this a fantastic fight. This is a really interesting matchup between two guys who have a very similar skill set as far as their wrestling is concerned, but a very different body type. Jimmy Rivera is a short and stocky brick shithouse, while Aljo Sterling is tall and slim and lanky and likes to use his reach to his advantage. Now, the main angle that I like in this fight is when you've got two guys that are wrestlers, the shorter one generally tends to have the advantage, simply because in wrestling it's all about the hips. If you can get your hips down, if you can shuck your hips when people come in for a takedown, that's how you counter wrestle. That's how you keep the fight where you want it and don't allow them to get that takedown on you. So someone like Aljamain Sterling, he's going to have one heck of a time trying to get underneath Jimmy Rivera. The other thing to remember is in this fight, this is an MMA fight. It's not just wrestling. You got to worry about the hands. When you're trying to get down below the hips of a guy who's got bombs in his hands and can just go to town boxing on you on your way in, that's not a good setup. So I really like Jimmy Rivera in this matchup. I think if Aljamain Sterling were to stand on the outside and try and make this a kickboxing fight, he's got the reach advantage, and maybe he can squeak out a 3-round decision running away with that kind of a strategy, but we've never really seen him employ that kind of a strategy. So unless he completely overhauled his game since the last time we saw him in September of 2018, which, let's just be honest here, I do not think he's done, I don't see how he beats Jimmy Rivera. Once again, I would love to look at props on this. I want to take Jimmy Rivera by 3-round decision. And the betting public out there has really helped me out on this one because the line opened up with Jimmy Rivera as a minus 210 favorite. However, 61% of the money so far has come in on Aljamain Sterling. A lot of people like that dog pricing on him, and it's brought the line all the way down to minus 145. So I'm going to snag that up. We can get minus 140 at Heritage, so even better. I'm going to play Jimmy Rivera straight at minus 140. If you can get a prop on him to take him by decision, I don't see this fight getting finished. I think this fight goes the full 3-round decision, and I would take Jimmy Rivera by decision for a little extra juice, but we're going to go ahead and get that line minus 140. The main card of UFC Phoenix kicks off with Andre Fili facing Miles Fury Jury. Now, I love this fight, and it makes me really sad to say that I have to pass on this one. I cannot give a pick out on this fight, and that's because it's between two young dogs who both have kind of run into a wall, and now they're facing each other. So it's real hard to tell where they're at as far as their skills being relative to one another. I think it's a fantastic fight. This is probably going to be the fight to watch for the night. It might be the most competitive fight of the night, and I'm really excited to see who comes out on top. Next up, Vicente Luque is fighting Brian Barberena, and this is another one of those fights where that dog price, man, is that tempting. Brian Barberena is super hard to put away, but Vicente Luque is the new and improved hype train in the UFC. Everybody is super stoked on this kid, and they just think he's going to be the next big thing. Well, Brian Barberena has spoiled the party for some other fighters before, and he is super hard to put away. So you can get him at all the way up to plus 341 right now. Massive, massive underdog pricing. And I just unfortunately can't bring myself to take a shot on that because I think Vicente Luque does win this fight. The value of the bet is going to be on Brian Barberena because I don't think there's value at laying minus 400. Laying 4-1, there's no value there. But I do think he wins. I think it'll be closer. I think that Brian will make it a sweat. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Brian showed up and pulled the upset because Vicente does have some holes in his defense. He's a purely offensive fighter, And Brian Barberena is the kind of guy that can sneak in and take advantage of those kind of holes. So we might be in for a war with that fight. That's another fun one to watch that I unfortunately have to pass on. Next up, we've got Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres. He's taking on Kron Gracie. Now, this fight is crazy interesting. Alex Caceres is one of the homegrown boys from The Ultimate Fighter. He was on one of the earlier seasons, and he's been duking it out in the UFC ever since. He's 14-11, though. He's had a real back and forth, up and down kind of career, barely hanging on to his spot in the UFC, but he's exciting. He causes scrambles. He goes for submissions. He has flashy striking. He's the kind of guy that could go on a 3-4 fight losing streak in the UFC, and they're still going to keep him around because he makes for good TV. Kron Gracie, now you recognize that last name, Gracie, as in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Yeah, that Gracie family. He's from Brazil, and he's 4-0, all 4 wins by submission. Now, he's only got 4 professional fights. Yes, all 4 of them were by submission, but all 4 of them were in Japan. And the thing about Japan and MMA fights, you can't ever really tell how legitimate those are. They stage fights, there's big money coming in, and people take falls. I mean, crazy stuff happens over in Japan. It's a different world. So this is the kind of fight where I again look at that angle of step up in competition. Yes, Kron Gracie might be one of the best jiu-jitsu practitioners in the UFC, and if it gets to the ground, he will likely submit Caceres. But if it's on the feet, Alex is going to be able to outstrike him and be flashy and make him look stupid. Alex also has a wrestling background where maybe he can counter-wrestle here. He's explosive, so if Kron's takedown game isn't on point, Alex might be able to get back up to his feet. I think this is one of those ones where we could be primed for an upset simply because of the fact that Kron is taking a big step up in competition here. Kron Gracie is just too big of a favorite, in my opinion. If you look at him right now over at BetOnline, Kron Gracie is a minus 315 favorite. The comeback on Alex at plus 265. I'm going to take a stab with Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres at plus 265. I think that he could pull the upset here. He could spoil the undefeated record simply by being a more well-rounded mixed martial artist than Kron Gracie. Next up, we've got a women's strawweight fight between Courtney Casey and Cynthia Calvillo. Cynthia Calvillo is 7-1, her only loss coming by decision to Carla Esparza, and a lot of people didn't agree with that. It wasn't a very good performance on her part, and it was a nice, surprising bounce back for Carla. And no shame losing a grappling match to a girl like Carla. That is her bread and butter when it comes to the UFC. And Courtney Casey is 8-6-0. So when it comes to fighter records, really not great. If you're getting close to being even, if you're getting close to being 500, that's really not a good look for you. Now, you look at the names of the girls that she lost to. Michelle Watterson, the karate hottie. That's, Felice Herrig, Claudia Gadelia. You've got some pretty decent named girls on there. So you can't blame her too bad. If she had more regional scene fights, if she had more pre-UFC fights, she probably would have a better record than the one that she has now. But as it stands right now, she doesn't look like she's doing well when she takes that slight step up in competition in the UFC. Cynthia Calvillo, they're trying to make a star out of. She's a real pretty looking girl. She trains over at Team Alpha Male. She's got a fantastic grappling game. The UFC has big plans for a girl like Cynthia Calvillo. They're giving her a girl in Courtney Casey that just cannot defend the takedown. There's a reason for that. If you guys recall in the breakdowns that I gave for the last UFC card, I love looking for spots where you can read between the lines of what the UFC is trying to do. Now, a lot of people, you get the haters out there that say, MMA is staged, the UFC is scripted, it's just as bad as wrestling. That's not true. Laugh at those people. It's not true at all. These people come in here and they fight their butts off. They give their blood, sweat, and tears to be the best in the world. None of this is scripted. But the UFC does create storylines. They put people together that have interesting stories. They put people against one another where they can see value in one of the fighters, and they do every once in a while softball a cupcake to somebody to make them look good or to give them a bounce back spot. And that's what we're dealing with right here. Courtney Casey may not be that bad of a fighter. She might be okay in the UFC if she got the right matchups. But right now she's not getting the right matchups. Right now this is the right matchup for Cynthia Calvillo. like I said, Courtney Casey just does not have good takedown defense, and Cynthia Calvillo is a takedown monster. The UFC want Cynthia Calvillo to grind out this girl and maybe even get a submission, and that's exactly what I think is going to happen. Unfortunately, the odds are a little bit crazy in this fight. I think everybody else is reading this the exact same way that I am reading it, and Cynthia Calvillo is a massive, massive favorite. She opened up at minus 270, and people have just been hammering that, and she's all the way up to minus 235 in spots. It's out of hand. It's not something I'm interested in doing. You all know I don't lay the big juice with big favorites. I just don't do it. So what I would suggest is if you've got another guy on the card that you like, or another fight on the card that you like with a decent sized favorite, maybe if you're eyeballing somebody like Manny Bermudez, that's one of the fights we did not go over, or if you do like Vicente Luque, throw him in a parlay with Cynthia Calvillo. I think that's the best way to play this. She can be a parlay piece and help bring that price down so it's playable for you. I just don't see how she's playable straight. Now, when the props do come out, if you can get even money or dog money on Cynthia Calvillo by decision, I think that's the way to go. Courtney Casey is a tough girl. She's 8-6-0, but she doesn't tend to get finished a whole lot. She does have one loss, and that loss is by submission. But like I said before, she went through Michelle Watterson, Felice Herrig, Claudia Gadelha, and all three of those women have fantastic ground games, and she did not get submitted. So I think she can go the full 3-round distance with Cynthia Calvillo, and Cynthia Calvillo by decision is easy money. If there was a prop out that on right now, I'd be all over it. The co-main event of the evening is an absolute slobber knocker between James Vick and Paul Felder. I'm sorry, I couldn't help but use the term slobber knocker. It's a fun thing to say. James Vick is 13-2-0. Paul Felder is 15-4, and this is in the absolutely stacked lightweight division, 155 pounds. Paul the Irish Dragon Felder just took a fight against Mike Perry at 170 pounds, and in that fight he lost a split decision, but that's not entirely his own fault. He was actually looking really good in that fight, and then he broke his arm. He actually continued the fight with a broken arm and managed to lose a split decision to a guy a weight class up that a lot of people are pretty hyped up on. James Vick is coming off of a terrible, terrible loss to Justin Gaethje, where he got severed from his consciousness in round 1 at 1 minute and 27 seconds. He has also been KO'd by Beneil Dariush back in 2016, and that was in the first round as well. He's a high output offense type of fighter, and he's kind of a kill or be killed type of fighter, which we love to watch in MMA. They put on a good show, whether they win or they go out on their shield. They are the fun ones to watch. But against a guy like Paul Felder, that's not the right strategy. Paul is a really cerebral fighter. He's very, very smart about the way that he approaches mixed martial arts. The UFC have actually brought him on as an analyst, and he's been doing a lot of that kind of work recently. And he's put together a real good run lately with 3 finishes over 3 UFC caliber contenders before that loss to Mike Perry. He's really looking for his title shot. I think James is going to be the guy that kind of reaches in this fight. He's going to be the one pushing the pace. And Paul Felder is going to be playing a bit of the matador. He's going to sit back. He's going to want to counter strike. And James Vick does have a questionable chin, especially coming off of the knockout loss against Justin Gaethje. You never know how long it takes for someone to heal completely from that kind of a just brutal KO. I think Paul can win this fight by decision just by playing the matador and keeping his range and kind of piecing up James Vick when he comes in. I think he can also win this fight by KO. If he gets the right counter off and connects with James Vick's chin, that's going to be night-night. Paul Felder is a powerful, powerful striker, and he finishes 67% of his fights by KO or 10 KO. He's got 10 of them on his record. This is going to be a fantastic fireworks kind of fight, and I don't blame anybody for being on either side of this fight. Both fighters have their upsides, and both of them are finishers. I wouldn't be surprised if either of them won, but I lean just ever so slightly to Paul Felder because I like to bet on the brain. When it comes down to fighters who are similar stature, similar skill set, similar sized, the smarter guy wins. And in this case, I think Paul Felder is just slightly more analytical than James Vick is. At Pinnacle, you can actually get dog money. We can get plus 104 on Paul Felder at Pinnacle, and we are going to lock that price tag up. I love it. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the main event of the evening, Francis Ngannou versus Cain Velasquez. What a main event. Cain Velasquez is hailed as the best heavyweight fighter that there has ever been. Prime Cain Velasquez was terrifying. Just Google his highlights, take a look at him on YouTube. He busted people open and caused some of the bloodiest fights that you have ever seen. He's an incredible wrestler, and he's actually an Arizona native. He comes out of ASU for his wrestling credentials, and he just loves to take people down and bust them up with elbows. That is his game plan. He has TKO'd and bloodied up some of the biggest names in the heavyweight division, including guys like Ben Rothwell, Antonio Rogerio Nogueira, Brock Lesnar, Antonio Silva twice, Junior Dos Santos. He has been an absolute wrecking ball. The problem with Cain Velasquez is he's not completely healthy. He does so much wrestling and goes so hard that he ends up hurting his back, and he's had a whole bunch of surgeries. He basically takes 2-year breaks between every single fight because of the health issues that he has. So he got KO'd by Junior Dos Santos back in 2011. After that, he came back the next year and put together a 4-fight win streak, and then he started having some of those health issues, and he got submitted by Fabricio Verdum. That's when Verdum got the title. After that, he took another year off, came back and fought Travis Brown, but I don't personally put a whole lot of stock into his TKO victory over Travis Brown. By that point in time, Travis Brown was not the Travis Brown that everyone thought he was. He was the hottest prospect in the heavyweight division for a very short amount of time before he got exposed, and I don't know if he stopped taking it seriously or what happened, but it was like he fell off a cliff. He just wasn't the same guy. And Cain's beating that he put on him was really the beginning of the end. Travis Brown didn't end up winning after that point, and he stopped being a professional fighter after that point. So I can't put a whole lot of stock into that. So in my opinion, the last thing that we really saw from Cain Velasquez was a submission loss to Fabricio Verdum in 2015. It is now 2019, and he's facing, again, the biggest rising star in the heavyweight division in Francis the Predator Ngannou. If you all remember, those of you that follow me on Twitter, we cashed with Francis Ngannou when he fought his most recent match against Curtis Blaydes. Everyone basically counted him out. Stipe wrote the book on this guy. He has no takedown defense. Curtis Blaydes is going to wrestle the crap out of him and just maul him. Ngannou stepped in there and KO'd him in 45 seconds. He just looked incredible, truly back to form. And really what I think happened is Ngannou got a bit of a big head. He was the biggest thing on the block, and everyone had already said it was a foregone conclusion. He was going to knock out Stipe Miocic and take the heavyweight title and be the baddest man on the planet. He believed his own hype. That was his downfall. He lost to Stipe, and then when he fought with Derek Lewis for his next fight, he was too scared to throw a punch because he didn't want to get made a fool of again. He didn't want to get taken down and be stuck under this giant monster for 3 or 5 rounds again. So he ended up just not throwing a punch and lost a really boring decision. Well, he finally got his mind right. He finally got back on track and humbled Francis Ngannou. Is a dangerous Francis Ngannou, and we saw that in the Curtis Blaydes fight. Cain Velasquez is notably a smaller heavyweight. Francis Ngannou sits atop the heavyweight limit, a solid pillar of straight muscle. This is just a really intriguing matchup. If Cain Velasquez gets on top of the Predator, he wins. If the Predator connects in round 1 and he touches Cain's chin, he wins. It's almost a coin flip fight. It really just comes down to who imposes their game plan first, because whoever imposes their game plan first wins. Cain Velasquez has taken some shots. He doesn't have the greatest defense. He's willing to put his chin out there to get the takedown. You cannot do that against a guy like Francis Ngannou. And Francis Ngannou, on the other hand, while he has shown to be in the right mind frame and make some improvements, he can't wrestle on the level of Cain. And if you get down underneath Cain, it's not going to be like Stipe where it takes everything he's got just to hold you down for 5 rounds. Cain will rough you up. You will not make it to the final bell if Cain gets on top of you. You guys know me. I'm going to take the dog. If you're going to give me that coin flip, if you're going to say that this is a close fight and it's just one outcome or the other, I'm going to take the free money. A nice little example I like to use for this is you've got a coin, right? It's got heads and tails. It's 50-50. You flip that coin 100 times, and you're going to be very close to 50-50. If you flip that coin, and every time it lands on heads, you get $1. But every time it lands on tails, I get $1.50. After we flip that coin 100 times, guess who wins? I'm going to have a much larger pile of money than you are simply because of that extra 50 cents. So we're going to take the extra 50 cents on Francis Ngannou. If you follow me on Twitter, I put out an article that I write for SBR every single week leading up to the fights. My pick back on Sunday was Francis Ngannou. I got him at plus 185 there. I'm not going to cheat. I can't give you plus 185 right now because apparently everybody listened to me. And Francis Ngannou has been hammered. He's all the way down to plus 135 in some places. You can get him at 5 dimes at plus 145. You can get him at BetOnline at plus 145. We're going to roll with Francis Ngannou at plus 145. Same thing on this one on the flip side. Cain Velasquez, he's got a whole lot of questions. I don't bet on guys with questions. But if you do, because he's the best heavyweight fighter we have ever seen, and because no one's been able to stop his takedown before, okay, I can see that. I can tip my hat to anybody betting Cain Velasquez in this spot and just be like, you know what? I get it. So that is going to be our main event play for the evening. We are going to take Francis Ngannou and expect him to get it done in round 1 against Cain Velasquez's old questionable chin that's being held together by neck surgeries. So just to recap, Bellator 216, we've got Czech Congo plus 375, Roy Nelson plus 185, Paul Daly plus 185. I would look for a Roy Nelson by decision prop, and I would look for a Paul Daly by KO prop. Those are two things that I'd be very interested in when it gets a little closer to fight time. UFC Phoenix, Andrea KGB Lee minus 170. Look for the by decision prop. I want to take Jimmy Rivera minus 140, Alex Caceres plus 265, Paul Felder at plus 104, and Francis Ngannou at plus 185. Those are our picks. Let's roll. Let's keep this win streak going. Let's keep it alive. We've got 2 events this weekend. Let's hammer them both and come out on top. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode. It means so much to me to have the support. We're a little bit rushed this episode because of the 2 events being on the same weekend, and I do apologize for that, but we fired through it as hard and as fast as we could. We've got a bunch of big underdogs that we like and only 2 favorites that we're going to take a swing at. Give me a like, share it, subscribe, tell your friends, tweet at me at MMA_hard. Follow me, Die Hard MMA Podcast on Instagram. Love you guys. Let's roll.